remember anyone here. No, you don't remember anything at all.
So, Hans, the floor is yours.
Okay. There's the Coronaversary. Happy Coronaversary, all of you. I thought of this, and it's not been an easy year, at least not for me, and for a lot of us, not so much, I think. And I think it's important to think about coping mechanisms, how we cope with things. So a lot of things came together, and I hope I don't take too much of your time, but it's a rather large one. I hope bear with me, and I hope it's interesting for you. The Coronaversary. Basically, I'm going to talk mostly about coping, about loneliness, and perhaps drinking a bit too much. And I hope that we have a community that helps each other, and I like to give some handles for that. Coping, of course, what's coping? It's things you do in the context of difficult life changes, and what can you do? It's the easy question is what's the best way to cope, and there's always a bit of a problem because situations and possibilities differ. Different outcomes may be okay in the end. Basically, it's a lot of it's a hard question to answer. What's the best way to cope? And I think actually it's a good thing to have an idea of a palette you can choose from. And if you only paint with one color, you got to be really an artist to make a good painting. But if you understand, there's 18 ways of coping in 9 polarities. It can help to understand that I can go at things independently, or I can choose other people and go handle them together. And it's of course it's just what you like, and sometimes it's also what you have to learn in life. I think because of the mondial little t trauma from COVID, I think we're all having new ways of coping. And sometimes it's better to learn to express feelings, and sometimes it's better to control feelings about things. Sometimes it's better to emphasize and make your involvement clear. And sometimes it's good to stay more in a distance. Sometimes you got to adapt and bend with a storm. But sometimes it's good to also say, well, I'd like to bend, but till here and not further. People can look for errors, can look for what's wrong in situations, or people can be really optimistic about, well, it will be all right in the end. People can act intuitively, or people can work systematically, and it can add to each other. I can accept the here and now, or can hope for a better future. I can distract myself, or I can stay focused. Sometimes it's better to wait a little, to let things grow or let things develop. Sometimes it's good to take action. And what I find interesting as an idea is that sometimes you can connect polarities and see that there's different ways of coping with Corona and loneliness, and perhaps the feelings we encounter in this period of time. If we look at loneliness, it's a good idea that let's not get mad. We're all herd animals, and we're all in our COVID bubble, and in our bubble nowadays, we only hear our own reasoning. And as you see, some people go quite berserk because they only have their own minds, and they miss fresh input and diversion. And we all miss sex, and we miss touch. And I think we all miss appraisal, and that's both from appreciation and criticism. And I think it's good to understand, what do I miss? And I'm not having a final list here, but it's maybe a good thing to help people and understand what they miss and what the problem is in this COVID situation. Loneliness is not being same as being alone. Alone is not being in the same room as others, and we're often in a single in a room nowadays. Loneliness is not being able to be who you are. I can be really alone in a room of 100 people because I can't be who I am for my own feeling. And if I can just be who I am, then somehow the loneliness gets less. And that's also this connection that if I want a way out of loneliness, and if I don't want to get depressed and don't want to get mad, I think it's good to cultivate connection. And that's not only outside, but sometimes it's also inside on yourself. What are really the things I want? What are my wants, needs, nice to haves? It's good to feel the feels. It's good to know what you're feeling and that you're feeling. As said, sometimes people are having more problems with the distractions of the feelings than the feeling itself. And it's good to feel the feels and to know that feelings have waves, and that you know the waves and know where they come from, and help people sometimes distract, sometimes feel what's the feeling, and give it words and give it labels. I work with chemsex groups, and there I sometimes notice that people really find it hard to say that horniness is something different from loneliness, is something different from the thirst towards drugs. And it's good to give it the right label. If I'm horny, be horny. If I'm lonely, be lonely. If I'm thirsty, be thirsty. And more likely that I'm getting my life in order if I give the right labels to the right feelings. And it's good to serve others to reach their goals. If you've got a problem, help somebody else is sometimes a really good coping strategy. Mother Teresa said once, help one person at a time and always start with the person nearest to you. Might be a good idea, especially in these times. You can help people, and then you can help them to connect perhaps with a bit of nature, and it maybe even a park. But it sometimes is soothing for our minds. And meditation, especially loving ourselves a bit, can be really good and important. And be aware of what your needs are. That's what I meant with the cultivation of connection inside and outside. Choose your available contacts and connect them to what you want, and talk about what you want. And I also noticed that sometimes internalized homophobia is a thing where people don't dare to be who they are, and that sometimes adds to the whole loneliness feeling. And so you're hit by, and being hit by the corona loneliness, and perhaps the internalized homophobia where you can't be who you are. Addiction and dependence, because sometimes people in this day and age, we tend to smoke a bit much, we tend to drink a bit more, we tend to snort a bit more, we tend to use a bit more. It's in all, and you can say, well, you shouldn't do that, but I think that the important thing of the problem of addiction is often that we cannot connect with our fellow men. And I hope that, and if you understand that addiction, the opposite of addiction isn't sobriety or abstinence, but it's connection. And helping our fellow men to stay out of the addiction spiral might be important to, well, basically to not be silent about it and not say you should quit using, because that's not the solution. Let me get into that. The addiction spiral is where basically it starts with fun. And then it gets functional. We have reasons to use where we unlearn to do it ourselves. And then we have daily use, and then it gets worse and worse along the way. And often people say, well, don't use at all, and it's all bad, and anything positive about the drug is really negative. I think it's often important to not deny the initial positive feeling, but that it gets negative, because the only way you get to it is by using. Because addiction and dependence and overusage are different things. The biological addiction is basically an experienced importance. The nucleus accumbens in your brain is not so much about fun or good feelings, it's much about how important is this. And that's for every drug by himself. So I can have this for cocaine and not alcohol, or the other way around. Emotional dependence, on the other hand, that's something different. There are reasons to use, to not feel or to not think about things, to not do or to do experience other things. Overusage is a thing that often is felt like really negative, and people feel ashamed because I did it to myself. And of course it increases other risk as well. But the thing is, if you go into the shame, then people only get worse and they feel worse. So they probably will feel the emotional dependence even more, and it gets to, again, overusage. Give them self-control, help them self-control. But biological addiction is a neurological affliction that doesn't get cured. You have to learn to accept it, but you can learn to live with it if you learn to recognize signals better, and if you learn to self-limit perhaps a bit, if you ride the wave of the feelings that are from the biological addiction. On the other hand, the emotional dependence, that can be healed. You can give yourself also the hope that you can get past that. And self-curiosity in is important instead of self-condemnation. If I'm having alternative behaviors to reach to the feelings I want to have, or to get away from the feelings that I don't want to have, that can help. And if I learn to perhaps active acceptance, where I cannot go away from, or things that I cannot reach anymore, that helps to accept and let it get back to my past instead of my future. Unwanted usage will happen. Slip-ups will happen. And often people say, you shouldn't, and again, shame. There's no shame in that. If you look at it good and figures, it's 98% that does stumble somewhere along the line. So stumbling is dangerous, but it's not important to not stumble. It's important to get up as soon as you can. And with your help, a little help of your fellow man, you can perhaps get up earlier if somebody stumbles. So if you like to help people, it's always interesting to have a look at it, because there are basically two ways why people use. It's either release or relief. And it's relief from what? And can you have a look at that? And release to go where? To go out of my mind and to feel free. Okay, how can we explore freedom in other ways? Routes out of hindsight, unwanted use is basically twofold. You can either do the well-known thing of stopping, cold turkey, abstinence, every drug is a slip up, is really clear, and the clarity is a pro. Problem is that in a lot of treatment centers, sex is often seen as being part of the problem, where it's, well, sometimes it's actually a way out of the problems. And the entry level, you have to quit everything now for the rest of your life, is sometimes too much for a lot of people, so they don't start stopping. Weaning is the other way, and it's often not seen as a possibility, but it is. Lessening frequency, amounts, and sort of drugs. You can go down the ladder and find your own rules to live by. Sex can be a part of the training, actually, and drugs can be used as an exit strategy. I've had people going from Tina to 3-MMC, which is good. It's better, and there is ways to go, but we're on our way, we're weaning. The con is, though, bargaining with the self. So you often need coaching because you got to have a plan and stick to that plan. That's often the problem. Stopping is often seen as the only possibility. And I always say, if the only tool you have is a hammer, you tend to treat everything as a nail. And people with addictions are banged on the head enough in their lives. So it's two reasons, two ways of working, and you can help people choose, and you can help people stick to their guns if you want to help them. And basically, the one way, abstinence may be the easiest way of regulating yourself, and weaning needs practicing, so you can help people practice things. Emotional dependence, you have to find and practice alternative ways for what you really want. And often people do not know what they really want. Sometimes it's something you've got to help them with. Sometimes you have to learn to accept things that you cannot run away from. And there will be moments of unwanted use afterwards, because it will feel right in a moment, even when it feels bad in hindsight. It helps to learn its lesson, though. What was the reason? And then we're getting back to the beginning of this spiral. What was the reason you did drugs? And how can you learn to do what you did with drugs without having to do drugs? And yes, that will be different, of course, but don't judge, but help men to find the lessons within. An epilogue, perhaps. The fear is COVID, and I think the world has gone mad a little. We see all kinds of war leaders with lots of war rhetoric to a virus. I mean, it's not even a single cell mechanism. Who's trying to win what? There is no war rhetoric logical. We can help each other, and we can take this virus, but we have to learn to live with it, I think. And it is, as said, we're all, we gotten rid of a lot of certainties we thought we have, and that makes sometimes people a little mad. And I'd like to quote the Joker, as he says, madness, as you know, is a little like gravity. All it takes is a little push. The most likely outcome of COVID is some of us will die. I say that harshly, but I've already said last year, if you got to choose between a man of 30 years old and a year of 62 years old, I'm 62, choose the man with the 30 year. And I think we have to learn to live a bit with dying, perhaps. And I think that we as a community may be able to help because we've learned to live with the virus before. And then too, war rhetorics and actions from fear did not help much. And informing yourself, caring for each other, making use of, not misusing meds helps. And learning to live with dying and connect with what is life to you. John Cleese says life is a terminal disease and it's sexually transmitted. I hope we help you cope perhaps a little bit with this story. I'd like you all to join in with the discussion about this and the ideas that we might have, the critique you might have on this presentation that you've seen. But I hope to have inspired you.
There's a party in my